everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Intersection of Stalking and Financial Fraud webinar. The webinar is brought to you by the National Center for Victims of Crime through our partnership with the FINRA Investor Education Foundation. I'll just give you a little bit of background on the organizations. The National Center was started a little over 30 years ago, and we got started because we realized there was a bit of a gap between the criminal justice system and they do to people from crime and then the victims that do find themselves victims. So we were established a national commitment to help victims of crime rebuild their lives, collaborate with partners throughout the country to advocate for stronger victim rights. We do a lot of education, training, and evaluation, and we try to provide information on victims' rights issues. Center is one of the many programs of the National Center for Victims of Crime. The Stalking Resource Center offers in-person trainings, webinars, individual and organizational assistance. They also put out fact sheets, brochures, and other materials helpful for victim advocates. If anybody would like to request trainings or check out the materials they offer, you can go to victimsofcrime.org/SRC. Resource Center is another program of the National Center for Victims of Crime. We got started about 5 years ago to help specific victims of financial frauds. We realized there's a lot of focus on violent crimes, and financial crimes can be just as devastating as violent crimes. And so we also partner with a lot of organizations that assist victims of identity theft, investment fraud, other types of financial crimes to ensure that they have the resources they need to make a full recovery. That doing this webinar series with us is the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority's Investor Education Foundation. So FINRA is an independent non-governmental regulator for securities firms. We work specifically with their Investor Education Foundation, which provides grants and manages targeted projects focused on investor education and protection. Presenting today, my name is Laura Cook. I'm the director of the Financial Crime Resource Center with the National Center for Victims of Crime. And we also have Elena Roberts, who is the legal director of our Stalking Resource Center. I'll give you a bit of a background on identity theft and financial crimes for those that may not be quite as familiar. When we do trainings through the Financial Crime Resource Center, we focus on our Taking Action Guide. It's an advocate's guide to assisting victims of financial fraud. There's 4 sections laying the foundation, which get a background on the 4 major types of financial fraud that we focus on in the guide. It has a bit of an advocate's role, which talks about being victim-centered and trauma-informed, particularly when you are assisting victims of financial fraud. We have an action step section, which guides you step by step through things that victims can and should do if they do find themselves a victim of a financial crime, and then an additional resources section at the end. The guides are free and they're available online. I'll provide a link to that later. 4 types of financial frauds we focus on are identity theft, invest fraud, mortgage and lending fraud, and mass marketing fraud. Financial fraud is a huge problem. More than 8 in 10 people are solicited for fraudulent offers. That statistic probably is even higher now. People are solicited for fraudulent offers through phones, through email, through people they know, and eventually family members and friends. Estimated that approximately $50 billion is lost per year to fraud, and this is also probably an underestimate, because unfortunately a lot of financial frauds are never reported. Notice that Americans aged 65 and older are more likely to be targeted, and they're a little bit more likely to lose money than those targeted in their 40s. So as I said, the 4 major categories, and what we're going to do today, since this webinar is on the intersection of stalking and financial fraud, we're going to focus on identity theft, because when we're talking about stalking and financial fraud, we notice that the main type of financial fraud that's perpetrated is identity theft. So the definition of identity theft is very, very broad. Basically, it's just when somebody uses somebody else's personal information fraudulently. And it can be the result of imposter scams, so posing as somebody else to get somebody's money or personal information. It can be skimming, swipe your card or your debit card, and there's a mechanism on there to steal those credit card, debit card numbers. It can be through phishing, which is usually through email or other types of social media. It's sometimes also involves imposter schemes where somebody's saying, oh, this is your bank, we need a social security number. It's not, it's a perpetrator, and they're just trying to get your personal information. It can also occur through data breaches. And so one thing we definitely want to talk about, because it's so topical, is the Equifax data breach that just occurred. When we tell people what to do once they become victims of identity theft or how to protect themselves from future identity theft, we tell them to use annualcreditreport.com. And those sites all do link the three big credit reporting companies, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian. And so if you do Experian, if you've ever used annualcreditreport.com, there are ways that you can go online to make sure that you are not affected by the Equifax breach, and if you were, there are things you can do to try to protect your identity since that has occurred. At the National Center, we sent out a mass email to all of our listservs last week with information, and if you would like it, I can send it to you directly. Theft is increasing exponentially. As you can see, from 2013 to 2015, the FTC noticed increases in identity theft in general, and also significant increases in tax or wage identity theft. We're going to talk a bit more about the FTC resources toward the end of the presentation. As we're talking about the intersection of stalking and financial crimes, we want to touch upon romance scams, because these two can often into both stalking and identity theft. So romance scams occur when a perpetrator is essentially feigning a romantic intention with the victim to gain their affection, to then use their information or their emotions to commit fraud. And typically what's happening is got a perpetrator, often not even operating within the U.S., often operating in a different country, who is going online and creating relationships with people and using their emotions to get them to provide resources to the perpetrator. Significantly, we noticed that the average victims of romance scam lose over $100,000. So this is one of the people that fall into romance scams often suffer the biggest losses, which is why we want to talk about these today. As you can see, the stakes are also increasing with romance fraud. There were a lot more complaints in 2015 than there were in 2014, and the amount lost also increased. Age 40 to 60 are most frequent targets, and what perpetrators often do is that they stalk victims before they start a relationship. So they're looking at their social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and they often target victims who are widows or widowers because unfortunately that makes them more vulnerable to these types of frauds. We touched a bit about seniors, and I do want to make sure we talk about victims of domestic violence here. Identity theft is very, very common in cases of domestic violence. It's not only but it also is another form of abuse. Often perpetrators will use identity theft to commit economic abuse, and also use it to surveil and stalk their victims. And I want to also touch on the cost of fraud. So a lot about the amount of money lost when we're talking about victims of financial crimes, but unfortunately financial crimes do cause a lot of other issues as well. So nearly 2/3 of victims report experiencing severe stress, anxiety, depression, and difficulty sleeping. They also suffer a plethora of issues occur in most crime victims. They feel guilty. They feel like this is somehow their fault, and that's why in our Taking Action guide, we really, really try to focus on what advocates can do to allay those issues that crime victims do face. And that overview of identity theft and some of the major concepts of financial fraud that I'd like everyone to know, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Elena. She's going to talk a little bit about give you a little bit of background on stalking and then talk more about the intersection between stalking and financial crimes.
Thanks, Laura. I appreciate the thorough overview that you just gave each of us on particularly identity theft. As you had mentioned, it is happening just in the last couple of weeks. It is such a relevant topic. And you and I have talked a lot about how we oftentimes do see particular crimes intersecting, and one of those is the intersection of stalking with identity theft. Basically, that stalking is a tactic that's being used in order to obtain information about a victim in order to commit that other crime of identity theft. And so I think before we completely jump in, I do just want to give a brief foundation so that we all start out on the same page. When we look at what stalking is, we at the Stalking Resource Center think is a pattern of behavior that's directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to feel fear. There's a couple of things to note with this. One, stalking is a pattern of behavior. It's a course of conduct. It's usually directed at a specific person, that's the victim, but bear in mind that third parties can also become victims as well. So either these third parties are becoming victims, and so therefore you have the crime of stalking being perpetrated against them, or they become victims in some other way. So perhaps they become the victim of financial fraud, they become the victim of domestic violence or a sexual assault or some other type of battery or assault against them because of their relationship to the initial primary victim. The other thing to note with stalking that makes it somewhat unique of other crimes is that fear is a key element of every stalking statute, and that really both the pattern of behavior and the fear element is really what distinguishes this crime from a lot of different crimes. And when I use this definition, just to keep in mind, I am talking in the criminal sense. There are civil statutes. Not every state has a civil stalking statute. And what a civil stalking statute, of course, would allow you to do is, let's say you didn't have enough evidence to proceed in a criminal case where the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. A victim can oftentimes pursue a case in the civil justice system, and that's trying to seek some type of compensation. The civil system is usually trying to put the victim back in the shoes that they would be in if that crime had not occurred. So the definition we're looking at here is really one that we use in the criminal context because every single state, every jurisdiction, I should say, does have a criminal stalking statute. If you do want to look to see if your specific state has a civil stalking statute, if your specific state has a stalking protection order, or if you just want to read what your criminal stalking statute looks like, please visit our website. We have all of the states that have both criminal, civil, and protection order stalking statutes that are listed. To be aware that stalking is a crime in every single jurisdiction. That includes federal statutes, of the state statutes, including the District of Columbia and all the U.S. territories. Many tribal codes have their own stalking statute. And of course, the Uniform Code of Military Justice has its own stalking statute. So this is a crime in every single jurisdiction. If we look at the rates of stalking, we see that they're extremely high. The Centers for Disease Control conducts an ongoing random sample telephone survey every single year. These results are the most recent. They came out this last spring in what's called the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, or the NISVIS. Those of you who are advocates on the phone with us, who have worked in the realm of domestic violence, sexual assault, teen violence, or even stalking, you are most likely familiar with what we refer to as the NISVIS. But it's a survey that's conducted by the Centers for Disease Control. And by their estimates, they say that 7.5 million people are stalked in the U.S. every single year. And there's things to note with this research. Number one, they only interview people over the age of 18. I think in this report they have started to incorporate those under the age of 18, but in many reports they don't. So it's likely that this number will even be higher. And the second thing to note, when they talk to the people who are participating in the survey, they don't just ask if they experienced fear, which you remember our definition, we just talk about fear. They actually ask the people if the behavior made them feel very fearful. Again, very fearful, that is one of the elements. Fear is an element, and very fearful is a subjective. Fear is a subjective element. And so very hard, I think, to wrap your hands around what potentially very fearful would look like and how that's going to differ from person to person. But generally speaking, 7.5 million people are stalked in the U.S. every single year. If you are curious about your state-specific stalking rates, I would be happy to go ahead and run those numbers for you. Basically, you just want to take 4% of your female population and 2% of your male population, and I'll give you the statistical number of people who are being stalked in your state, in your county, whatever jurisdiction that you would like to do that for. It's important as we jump into this intersection of financial fraud and stalking that we identify the people who are most likely to be the ones who will perpetrate this type of crime. What we know is that 3 out of 4 victims know their offender in some capacity. Most of the time is going to be a current or former intimate partner. In fact, if you look for females, it's 62% will be stalked by a current or former intimate partner, and for males, it's 43%. But that's going to be at least half of all stalking victims. But if you flip all of this on its head, so you look at acquaintance stalking, strange stalking, family member stalking, and yes, that does occur, and even person of authority, if you flip all this, it's about 90% of the time that people will be stalked by somebody that they know. So you think of it as half of all stalking victims will be stalked by a current or former intimate partner, or another way, about 90% of people will be stalked by somebody that they know, even if they haven't had that relationship. It could be an acquaintance, a family member, or a person of authority. And why that becomes so relevant is because these are the people who we likely trust with our information. These are that we likely email or are connected to on social networking sites. They be people that we allow into our homes, people that sometimes know intimate details about our lives, so our dates of birth, our mother's maiden names, our social security numbers, where we do our banking, maybe even our bank account numbers. So it's pretty easy if you look at this chart and you start to think about it in that way. It's pretty easy to start to see how these two crimes often do intersect. Before we there, I want to just briefly touch on stalking and how it intersects with other crimes. There are a number of different ways that stalking can come into play in various crimes, and oftentimes when we're training, particularly law enforcement officers or prosecutors, what we talk about that stalking comes in many different forms and through other different crimes. I almost think it might be easier to think of a crime where stalking might not intersect with it, but it can come in with domestic violence, sexual assault, burglaries, or home invasion. We often see it with criminal damage to property. We sometimes see it in hate crimes. We see it in wiretapping or utility theft. And then, of course, at the very top on the right-hand side, we do see it frequently in such as identity theft. Stalking cases, we see that nearly a quarter of all stalking cases will involve some type of property damage. That usually the number one piece of property to be damaged is going to be the vehicle, the car, but cell phones are right up there with vehicles. Nearly a quarter will involve some type of criminal damage to property. We know that 21% will involve a direct attack on the victim. And just kind of as an aside, our intimate partners, stalkers are our most dangerous type of stalker. They're the ones that not only will physically attack the victim, their behaviors will escalate quickly, they are more likely to use weapons, they're more likely to recidivate, but they are also more likely to assault third parties. So again, just thinking about those third parties that could come into play, friends, family, even children of the victim. We know that 15% will involve an attack on another person or a pet. We see a huge overlap when we look at stalking and domestic violence. And I don't, that's not necessarily what this webinar is about today. If anyone wanted more information about this, this is something that we really focus in on, because what we know is when you have stalking and domestic violence that are co-occurring, the risk for legality for that victim is heightened than either of these behaviors alone. And already we know that if a victim is in an abusive relationship, the risk for lethality is high, particularly with threats and physical abuse. And the same thing with stalking. We know that there's always a risk for stalking violence, including homicide. Identity theft. This is really something that I would say in the last decade we're seeing more and more of. When you think about how stalkers will utilize a victim's information, we often see that they're charging things to the victim's credit card. Again, if you think back to that current or former intimate partner situation, it's very easy to see how someone would have access either to the credit card information, even the security code on the back, particularly if they're living in the house or just physically have access to it. But even if they don't, charging items to a credit card anymore is pretty easily done. I know Laura talked about the skimmers, getting that credit card information, just even when you're randomly swiping it to fill your car up with gas or to buy something at the 7-Eleven. So skimmers are often being used as well, but that doesn't necessarily involve stalking because it's likely that you're not going to know that person. But here you probably do. We see stalkers will also take money out of accounts from their victims. Again, easy to think, and I think this even goes beyond a current or former intimate partner. These are probably people who, again, are friends with you on social media. They might have access to your date of birth. They know others' maiden name, or they know the town that you were born in. They know your pet's name. I mean, these are all of our security questions, and I think that, as a society, we do have to think, especially if we're working with victims, we have to think broadly about how we're going to keep our information secure. So answering our security questions with truthful, honest answers probably isn't the best way to go about that. So instead of what is your mother's maiden name, you might just put name. Or if you can remember something different, that's great. A lot of times people can't. That's one workaround for trying to keep those security questions actually secure. And finally, we see that offenders are opening and closing accounts in the victim's name. And that, this really not only taking the money out, but closing the accounts really wreaks havoc on a victim's financial situation. And we're not going to go into great detail, but we know that stalking in and of itself has a real financial impact on victims. And that's even outside of money being taken or accounts being charged. But there is a real financial, I think, level of victimization that goes right along with the stalking, even aside from the identity theft. how might this happen? How are people really able to get some of this information and perpetrate these types of crimes? I think stalking we've gone over enough so you understand how stalking can and oftentimes does occur, particularly in that intimate partner situation. But how does the identity theft in particular occur? And that we have to look at the technology. Technology is always changing, and it changes at such a rapid pace. Unfortunately, our offenders stay on top of the technology just like we try to do, and they will find ways to perpetrate crimes using that technology, even if the technology was intended for something different or something to be used for good. And so we have to be vigilant with our information. What that we see some of the crimes being perpetrated is through the use of computer and cell phone spyware. Spyware is a type of software that can easily be downloaded either onto your cell phone or onto your computer. It can also be installed remotely, meaning I, as an offender, don't have to have physical access to your phone or your computer. I can send you an email with a link. I can send you a text message with a link. And if you open that, it's possible that you have just downloaded some type of spyware or malware. And you can see there's a number of different ways that spyware and computer spyware, or cell phone spyware and computer spyware, are used to track, monitor, and surveil victims. Maybe it puts the offender in a position to see absolutely everything that is done on that phone or computer. Every call they can listen to, every text message they can read it, every email that you check on your phone or your computer, they can read it. They take screenshots of anything you're doing online, every website you go to. And bear in mind, this doesn't just include the website you're going to. It includes every single type of keystroke. If I am using my phone to log into my bank account and I'm using my account passwords and my bank account information, it's possible that this person has access to that. Same thing with the computer. So just to recap, probably spyware is the most intrusive type of technology that is used to track, monitor, and surveil victims. It is something we oftentimes do see just in stalking cases in general, because people want to listen to the phone calls. They want to hear or see everything that victim is doing. But it can also relay all sorts of passwords, bank account information, Social Security. Again, everything that you type can come up through the use of spyware. There we go. A note, tablets. So tablets are just as vulnerable to malware and spyware as cell phones and computers. So just don't forget about that. As again, aside, I think when it comes to things like apps, QR codes, things like that, aggressive ads, yes, are trying to get information from you, or they're, again, putting malware onto your tablet. But in this instance, I would say it's less likely you would know the person. But that's not to say, again, that this isn't one of the ways a crime of identity theft can be perpetrated. Like the cell phone spyware and the computer spyware, which is software that can be remotely downloaded, there's something different that does a similar function, and that's a keystroke logging hardware. Unlike the software, this is hardware. This is something that you actually have to physically plug into your laptop, your computer, and it can be disguised as something else. So it can be disguised as either a keyboard, it might look like a USB drive, it could just be some random cable cord that's in the back of your computer or laptop. And think about how often, especially at your work, how often do you really look at all the cords that are plugged into your laptop or computer or all of the USB drives. So what this hardware is doing is every time you make a keystroke, so again, every email, every Word document, every bank account, every password, everything you're typing is storing it on its hard drive. And then the person, the offender, has to physically come to that hard hardware off the computer and download that information. So unlike the spyware, which is software and they're seeing it occur in real time, this is hardware that has to be retrieved at a later time and downloaded onto some other type of system for them to see all of the information you had done throughout the day. You talked a lot about some of the imposter scams, and I think when we look at the social engineering scams, this is part of I would consider the imposter scams. Social engineering scams are a way for people to play upon our emotions. And again, this can be by somebody that we know, or it can also, I think, be done by someone that we don't know. But basically, they want to gain access to information by exploiting our human psychology. So that's why they play on our sympathies or our fear. They're very manipulative. A classic example of this might start with a friend who is on your social networking site, and they send you a message asking for some money. Like, I need a quick loan. So I wouldn't do this if it wasn't necessary. Sorry to do this to you. And they do this saying, my car needs repairs. That way I can get, to work on Monday. Otherwise, I'll have to call in. I can't make it. And it always ends, because you send the money, you think it's your friend, they give you their bank account number, and you send, and it could be something as minimal as $50, right, or $100, something not a ton of money, but definitely you're using your money to what you think is help your friend. And it turns out that a few days later, your friend never needed car repairs. In fact, that wasn't your friend who had contacted you. It was somebody else pretending to be your friend. They used a name that was very similar to your friend's name. And how you would know that is because your privacy settings on your social networking sites aren't set to be ultimately private. And so if anyone can view who you're friends with on your social networking sites, it's very easy to then try to come up with a name very similar to someone you're already friends with and proceed to be an imposter, so to speak, of your friend. So it's very easy to see how this would be happening. What else? I think that's it on that slide. Phishing, another type of, I would say, scam, and how it intersects with identity theft. With phishing, it involves making attempts to acquire passwords or account numbers and other related information. This information is often used to commit identity theft. We see that the criminal makes contact via social networking sites or maybe an email, and they're, again, perhaps pretending to be someone like a doctor's office saying that they need to update their medical records. Can you send information? Maybe they want your passwords to certain things. But again, they're just phishing to see, are you going to buy into this and reply and give them that information so that they can access your bank accounts, your credit card information, all of that good information. And finally, when it comes to emails and requests for information, I know this is not super high-tech, but it's worth noting that emails are never, ever, ever private. So please don't think that when you're sending emails with your social security number, your date of birth, or anything like that, that is sent in a private mode, because it's not. Only do we have to agree that the open something like email or Yahoo or any of the other accounts, we agree that someone can monitor our emails, but we also, again, have to be wary of requests for information. We shouldn't be opening emails from people that we don't know. We see a lot of offenders who use things called email anonymizers, or they will spoof their email and make it look like it's coming from your child's school or from your doctor's office, or maybe it's just anonymous. And these are all technologies that exist. So we shouldn't be opening random emails. We certainly shouldn't be clicking on links. definitely shouldn't be replying to requests for information if we absolutely can't verify that that's who we think we're sending that information to. If you want to double check, all you have to do is, let's say you receive something from what you think is your doctor's office, don't reply, don't open it, don't click on the attachment, just call your doctor's office and ask if they sent you an email that was asking for an update to your information. It's an easy way to verify it. Laura touched on the romance scams. This is just another way that we see people become victims of stalking, and then again, that identity theft. There are so many online platforms where people connect with each other, and oftentimes we don't know these people, but we somehow begin to trust them over time, and we divulge certain information. And it really even goes outside of identity theft. So not only can stalking take place online and the cyber harassment, but again, things like home invasion, home burglaries, because these people know you're going to be out of town, or they know now that you have valuables inside your home. And so we just see a lot of information that's being shared on these social networking sites. I think people really do believe that they know and they trust these people that they're communicating with, but the reality is you really don't. So we just have to be wary of things like that. And I think Laura really hit it on the head with the romance scams, particularly if you're never meeting these people in person. I just want to end with what information is out there. What information is out there about you, about any of the victims that you might be working with, or the clients that you're representing? It's so important that we Google ourselves. Know that there are ginormous data brokers that are out there collecting tons of information on each of us. It's everything down to the shopper saver card that you swipe at the grocery store so that you can save 40 cents on that bag of pasta, all the way up to do you buy a house? Where is it located? What are your property taxes? Are you registered to vote? Everything we do, whether it's online or not, being tracked. And this goes back to, if you've ever searched for a pair of shoes or something online, and then you constantly get those ads about it. So all of our information is being tracked, and it's being stored with these data brokers. These data brokers will sell our information to anyone who is willing to pay for it. And usually the fee to do so is not very high. You can usually get someone's information for about $40 to $50. So what do, right? Now that you probably are paranoid about everything that you do on your cell phone and your computer, which was not our intention, by the way. But what can you do to take steps to keep your information more private and safe? And with that, I'll turn it back over to Laura.
Thank you for the valuable information. It definitely can be used to help our clients and help the communities we're serving, but also probably for a lot of us as well. I know I've seen those data brokers, new ones pop up every once in a while, and people information around saying, oh, there's this one, you can opt out of it. But I'm sure as soon as you opt out of one, there's a new one popping up. So I'll go a little bit back into more the identity theft realm and things you can do specifically to help with identity theft. There are probably things that you can also do to try to address those issues we have with technology and stalking. I know there are things you can do with your computers. Like Elena said, maybe as simple as just checking your computers and your hardware every once in a while, making sure it doesn't look like it's been tampered with, particularly if you're in a situation where there's domestic violence occurring or something like that. And I know there are other things you can do with browsers. You can clear caches and cookies and things like that may be able to help with clearing that information so that it's a little bit less accessible from perpetrators. So in our Taking Action Guide, and I go back to this guide a lot because it's basically what we base our Financial Crime Resource Center around. So a lot of the work we do is really comes from and stems from the production of this guide 5 years back. So some things victims can do, first and foremost, with any sort of crime, identity theft included, if possible, they should discontinue engagement with the perpetrator or perpetrators. Another thing they should do is create a case file. If there are emails, documents, text messages, calls, any sort of log, you should always keep that information in a safe space. And so a lot of times we'll see people that have emails and have text messages and keeping everything on their cell phone. And like Lena said, perpetrators often have access to what your cell phone. So tell people to print that information out and keep it in a hard file that is somewhere safe. Another any victim of any crime should do is to know their rights. You go on your state attorney general website for a list of your victim rights in your area. Fourth, you should report suspected fraud widely. Most reporting is to local agencies, so police, sheriffs, and the like. With identity theft, you're probably also going to want to report with the Federal Trade Commission, and we'll talk a little bit about their website in just a minute. And also with the Better Business Bureau has a scam tracker website that is helpful, collects information, and they work with police to try to scams that are most common in certain areas. Lastly, one source I want to make sure everybody is aware of, victims can and should consider civil remedies. With identity theft and with stalking, civil remedies may not always be the best avenue of recovery. However, there are circumstances in which filing a civil lawsuit, even against a perpetrator, could potentially be helpful. And for that, the National Center has an attorney referral service that can be contacted by victims or advocates. And what we'll do is we can vet cases a bit and determine whether it's a viable option in each individual case. We have a checklist on the slide. It's an example of a checklist, a screenshot of it. The checklists are specific to the 4 types of fraud we focus on in the Taking Action Guide. So we've got an identity theft one, an investment fraud, an image and lending fraud, and a mass marketing fraud checklist. Those can be printed out, and those can actually be given directly to victims. There's a little checkbox they can go through and check off each step as they complete it. And it can help everybody keep track of what they've done and who they've contacted. For identity theft, the organizations we want to make sure everybody knows about, the Identity Theft Resource Center is a really good resource. They've got a 24-hour hotline, and typically when I've gotten cases that are super complicated with, a lot of, for instance, you might have power of attorney or guardianship conservatorship issues that come up. Some military cases I've referred to them. In cases where there's a lot of complications to the identity theft, and just referring them to the FTC identitytheft.gov website probably isn't the most helpful. I'll tell them to call the Identity Theft Resource Center. The FTC identitytheft.gov website is an amazing resource. It is launched a little over a year ago now, and it's really a one-stop shop for identity theft. So if any victim of stalking finds themselves also identity theft, the identitytheft.gov website is a great resource. They can go there through the entire website, and it really walks you through step by step. It asks you specific questions about what's happening, and then it gives you an action plan so that you can try to stop the identity theft and work to prevent it in the future. This is just in fact we have on identitytheft.gov, and it's very user-friendly. That's probably the best part of it, is that it's easy for most victims to use. Preventing identity thefts. There was a slide previously where we talked about specific populations that are targeted. One of the specific populations is previous victims. So once people become a victim of financial crime, their personal information is often out there, maybe more susceptible. In addition, once people have lost a good chunk of money as a result of a financial crime, a lot of times they're looking for a way to recover. So we do see people being re-victimized a lot. Prevention, the best thing to do is assume you already have been a victim. Most of us probably have. I've definitely gone and logged into my bank account and seen some charges that I didn't authorize. If you catch things quickly, you can usually in and try to alleviate sort of damages you suffer as a result of those. In addition, people also always shred documents with any sort of personal information on them. If you want to be extra careful, you can use a diamond shredder instead of like a vertical or horizontal one. You also want to be wary of requests for personal info, like Elena talked about with websites and romance scams. If people are asking for personal information, they don't have a good reason for doing it, it's probably for a criminal reason. So even at doctor's offices, you have to give a Social Security number. Usually they use that as an identifier, and sometimes you use a different number. Take care with ATMs and card skimming machines. Talked about that a little bit before. They are sometimes hard to notice if they're there, but take a look. Be careful when you use an ATM in an unsafe location or in a location that appears to be unsafe. You monitor your credit reports as often as you can. And there are a number of prevention strategies specifically for tax fraud, file taxes early. So there's a lot of intuitive things that you really can do, and most of us maybe know about them and just aren't as diligent as we should be. But particularly if you're working with a victim that has suffered identity theft, these are things that can help them from being re-victimized. Resources, so the identitytheft.gov is the big one for these sorts of cases. And also I wanted to note our Victim Connect Resource Center. We have a number of assistance specialists that are, I believe they're running from 9 a.m. until 7 p.m. as of now, and 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. They can assist victims throughout the United States with any sort of issue that comes up, including stalking, including financial crimes, including violent crimes as well. So they're at 1-855-4-VICTIM, and they can put victims in touch with local resources and organizations that may be able to directly assist them. In addition, we've got the Taking Action Guide that I've talked a lot about. Guides are free, and they're available online. You can get PDFs of them. You can also order them. You can order as many as you'd like. We're actually updating the guide and are hoping to have a new version coming out at the end of this year. So keep an eye out for that as well. Before we get to questions, I just want to make sure everybody that came to listen today knew about our national conference. We are going to be in Portland, Oregon on December 5th through the 7th. Elena's going to be there doing some great trainings. And so if you are in the Portland area or able to get there in December, it should be a really good conference this year. Okay, on to questions. We've got a couple of questions. So first, somebody said that they wanted to everybody listening to know that if they were a victim of identity theft, that they can apply for the OAG's Identity Theft Passport. That's actually a resource I didn't know about. So thanks, Mary, for letting us know about that resource. Secondly, this is Elena. This is probably a question for you. It's specifically the person would like information about military stalkings, and they're asking Germany specific. So I don't know if we have international resources, but if you do have anything.
Germany, no, and I apologize for that. Our funding really only allows us to do the training within the United States, and that is our primary focus. However, I know that we have actually gone to Germany and presented on stalking. So while I'm personally not familiar, I think you all have a stalking statute. I personally don't know a lot about it, so I apologize. But I think our emails are somewhere at the end, I believe. And you can certainly email me directly. I'll see what information I can find for you.
Thanks, Elena. Emails will be on the last slide for anybody who wants to ask follow-up questions. We have another question for seniors in the community who don't use technology. What resources can they utilize to check their credit reports or report possible financial fraud? So as we're moving to more and more tech-savvy, I think, unfortunately, we're seeing less and less. And we do a lot of work with senior victims and also elder financial exploitation. And unfortunately, we do see a lot of issues with the lack of availability of resources that seniors can use. And they're a little bit disappearing slowly but surely. What I probably would suggest is that if advocates are able, if one of your clients is not able to do this themselves, if there's any possible way that you could sit with them or that a family friend or a guardian could sit with them and do things and help them do things, that would probably be the best way to access those resources. There are resources online that can be printed and given to people, but I think as far as most of the reports go, they're typically online. Some places do have phone numbers that can be called, but more and more you're going to see organizations switching over to collecting information online. Okay, I think the last question is specifically about an immigration issue. Would there be any compensation for victims if their identity is stolen? So I think this person is asking about employment identity theft. As compensation goes, victim compensation is the first thing that comes to mind. Unfortunately, most states do have victim compensation programs. Victim compensation programs, however, are typically reserved for victims of violent crimes. So in a lot of states, there's really not funding for victims of financial crimes or property crimes or things like that. Some states are moving over and to remedies for victims of financial crimes, so there may be some funding available through victim compensation. The other thing I would suggest is especially seeing if there's any legal remedies through an attorney that does employment law. That's not something we delve into a lot here at the National Center, but there are employment lawyers that are available, and particularly maybe even through legal aid services that could potentially help with that unemployed identity theft issue. The Identity Theft Resource Center is probably also a good to go. I definitely have referred a couple of employment identity theft issues to them, and I think they might be able to give some more specific resources. Okay, well, a bit of a long-winded answer to that question, but I think with that, we are going to close up for today. Thank you all so much for attending the webinar and spending a little time with us today. Thank you, Elena, for presenting and giving us really valuable information. And please email us. Our emails are on the last slide there that's up now if you have any questions or need any resources. Thank you, everyone.